in a few hours' time. We have Emmanuel Macron has just left or is about to leave.
There are
and those things may or may not be related. But the session we are holding today is on a topic of utmost importance to Europe, to the world, and I would argue also to the United States of America. We're going to be talking about Ukraine and the path to peace in Ukraine. Coming into this week, many of us in the media were expecting some sort of announcement on a peace deal, some sort of announcement on cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. However, the more we get closer to the arrival of Donald Trump, the less likely that appears, and the more we hear about Greenland instead of Ukraine. So it's a really fascinating moment. I want to welcome everybody who's watching on the live stream, everybody in the room. I think we're going to have a fascinating discussion. A really top-notch panel that we have here today. I'll introduce them now, and then we will get into some of this discussion shortly. So on my left here, first of all, Kirilo Budanov is the head of the President's Office of Ukraine. Thank you for joining us, sir. Next to him is the Foreign Minister of Finland, Elina Valtonen. Thank you very much for joining us. Next to her, Anita Anand, Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada. Thank you for joining us as well. And last but not least, the Senator for the great state of North Carolina, Tom Tillis. Thank you for coming, sir. So I'd like to start with you, Mr. Budanov. Obviously, this is an incredibly important, fraught moment for your country.
We are actually just able to do much more.
Where are we headed? What is the most likely outcome? And when, if at all, can we see genuine moves towards peace in your country?
You go in communities where AI is not present. And there, how do people prepare for it? There is nothing happening now. And actually, we did something. I'm not going to vouch 100% this is correct, but we did a review to see countries where there is demand for AI skills, whether this demand is matched with supply of AI skills. And we found a very interesting picture. In some countries, demand is very high, supply is low. Some actually developed countries. In some countries, supply is very high. You have tons of skilled people, but the economy is not absorbing that supply. And the sad story is the countries where there is neither demand nor supply. And that risk of this massive divergence is at the country level then mirrors within a country.
So Brad, Kristalina, with this evocative accordion analogy, which is affecting not only countries but also populations, you've been on the front lines of this in the United States. You see now suddenly this raise in opposition to data centers. People saying, oh, we're unhappy, we don't think the water, it's electricity, we're not going to see the jobs. And a lot of people expect that given the shift in skills that are necessary, given the transition, that you're going to see that America's ripe for another wave of populism.
If there's any country, apart from Ukraine, that understands, I guess, Russia and Russia's history of aggression, I would argue
the big issue in the United States is, as you just mentioned, Ian, it really is around communities with data centers.
Meetings in recent weeks
it's coming at a time when the number one political issue, the number one economic issue
in Ukraine and where we're headed.
The impact of inflation.
So
people see these large construction projects. They know that those jobs actually are good jobs, skilled labor jobs, not just people doing construction work, but it's skilled electricians.
Thank you for the introduction, but the only thing I have to correct is that,
also
yes,
know
we
that
do have
unfortunately,
is over,
quite some experience with Russia and Russian aggression over the course of the past, not only decades, but years,
what they're really asking is,
hundreds of years.
what does this mean
I still
for
don't
me
understand
and my
Russia, and I certainly
Are we
don't
going to pay higher
sympathize with
electricity
the
prices?
imperialistic
Is the water
ambitions
pressure
of
in our
that country
showers
that's
going to be impacted?
apparently still
who's really
is
going to
ongoing.
get these jobs?
Now,
is it going to be my family and my
we would hope
neighbors,
for
or is it
peace,
going to be somebody who
but
moves into
for
town
a peace
from
to
somewhere
last,
else?
it needs to
Those
be
are
just.
really legitimate
It needs to be
questions.
genuine.
And I think it's incumbent on
Unfortunately,
all of
we
us in
haven't
the industry
seen
in the United States
any
to address them
concessions
head
on the side of Russia
and offer the kinds
to
of
reach
assurances that people
a proper
need,
peace
that
deal
we
in
will
Ukraine.
invest
And let's
in
face it, it
electricity
was
so
Russia
that people's
almost
electricity
4
rates
years ago who
don't
started
increase,
the invasion in
that
the
will
first place.
replenish
And
more water in these
it
communities
could be
than
Russia
we use, that will
yesterday,
work
today,
with the
tomorrow
kind of
to
training,
decide that
whether
there's
it's
no
skilled
war.
labor or IT
What
jobs
we
or other
need to
ongoing
do now
jobs, so that
collectively
local residents
is
can fill them.
that we increase
And
the pressure
I think
on
as
Russia,
data
because we
centers
do
spread,
see
inevitably
that
people in other
that
parts of the
country
world will ask
is
the same
in
question. If people
economic
benefit,
decline and
it would
will
be
be
us.
so
And I think people have a right to
also
expect
long into the
their share of
future.
the benefits.
They
And to be
won't
fair,
have
I wanna
any
repeat
strategic
this.
benefits.
You would say that today
over the course
a
of the
much bigger
coming years.
issue
The
for
only
the
thing
tech
is, of
companies and
course,
AI is
they
response
are
to these concerns
apparently
about data
willing
centers and
to
affordability
lose their
than concerns
last
about
man
job
and
loss
use
or
their
job
final
flexibility in terms of
ruble
right now.
on the war
In
of
terms
aggression.
of the politics for 2026,
But we
for
can't allow
sure.
that to happen,
I mean,
and
the
I
world
think,
is sort of a quilt,
as
if
the
you
free
will,
world, we need
with
to
different
stay the
colors
course
of
and keep
fabric
on
when you
supporting
look at the
Ukraine,
construction of data centers.
ramp up the
In the
pressure on
U.S.,
Russia.
local
And third,
communities
and
blocked
this I'm
$98
taking
billion
home to
of private sector
Europe in
investment in
general.
just the third quarter of
We
last
should
year.
be
You come to Europe
massively
and
now
governments want to
investing in
spend
defense and
taxpayer
deterrence.
dollars
And I
to
think the decisions
subsidize
made last
data
summer
center
in The
construction.
Hague
You
were
look at the
exactly the
Middle
right
East, and
ones, and
there's obviously
certainly
a
also
major
something which
economic
Finland has been
strategy of creating
driving
an
for
export,
many years since
token exports, or
we have
exports, if you
taken
will,
our defense and
out of,
deterrence very
say,
seriously.
Saudi Arabia,
always.
the UAE, and the like.
Thank you, Minister.
China probably
Minister,
has an ability to go faster in some
can
ways when it comes to bringing electricity online and getting infrastructure built.
Canada is a member of NATO.
Go to Africa.
Canada is one of the closest neighbors to the United States,
We need more electricity, and we need more data centers.
How involved do you think NATO is at this point in the negotiations, in the
technology?
plans
India already
to
an incredible job with
this conflict, or is it really just in the hands of the President of the United States?
Public services to people, and you're improving growth, and you're improving their per capita income
first of all,
without actually blowing out the budget.
Hello, everyone.
What can AI do?
Obviously,
how are you deploying AI
I'm very
to
happy
further
that we're having
that
a panel
message?
about
How
Ukraine
fast are we
to
going to
discuss
see? Where are we going to see?
Ukraine. Because,
Absolutely.
as you
Every sphere of
suggested, the
life and
attention
economy,
is being
we are
diverted
focusing on
away
diffusion-
from the potential
diffusion of AI.
ceasefire that has been on the table.
in a very
and the very
systematic
point,
way.
and I want to underline this,
what is the biggest constraint?
that
The biggest
there
constraint
should
is
be
availability
nothing
of GPUs.
about
How do you
Ukraine
solve that
without
constraint?
Ukraine.
To solve that constraint,
This
we decided
is
to have a public-private
fundamentally
partnership
important
in which
as we consider the
empanel
20-point
38,000
peace plan,
GPUs,
as we discuss
which are a common
the
compute
security
facility available to
guarantees
the entire
and
population.
the efforts of the coalition of the
Unlike
willing.
in
The
many
fundamental
rich countries
principle of
the
territorial
big tech
integrity
basically
and
controls the
sovereignty
access
of
to
states
GPU, we
is
decided to
what
create a public-private
Canada
partnership
believes
in which the common compute
to
facility is
be the driver
enabled by the government
of
and
the
subsidized by the government,
negotiations
so
and the
that
outcome.
entire population, all the
Again,
students,
nothing about
researchers,
Ukraine
startups,
without
they
Ukraine.
all get access to it.
And Canada
And the cost is practically
has a
one-third of the
distinct
cost
relationship
in most of the
with
countries. That is
Ukraine.
first. Second,
not
having a
just
set
as
of
a
free,
NATO member,
a bouquet of
not as
models
the neighbor of
which basically
the
meet
United States,
most of your needs.
but a distinct
Third,
relationship
making
with
sure that
Ukraine.
people understand
We
this technology, learn
have,
this new technology.
outside of Russia,
Already we are going
the
through a program
largest
for 10 million
population of
people to be
Ukrainians
trained on
outside
AI
of Ukraine.
skills.
We
Fourth,
have
making sure that the
put
IT industry,
the largest per
which is a very
capita
significant industry in our
amount
country,
of
pivots in a very
support,
systematic
financial
way
support
towards providing
Ukraine,
services
military,
to Indian
economic,
companies as
financial,
well as to the global
infrastructure-related
companies
support at
using
$22.5
AI
billion
as a
for a
very
country of
effective
40 million,
enabler
for a
of
country of 40
efficiency,
million people.
enabler, a multiplier
We
of
are co-leading the effort
productivity
to bring
in
Ukrainian
any
children
operation that we
home.
do.
and have spearheaded that vis-a-vis 20,000 Ukrainian children will be holding
inside the country. Last time I asked you to look outside on winners and losers.
In the fall in
the crazy thing about Saudi Arabia is that
to ensure that we're bringing countries.
Right? I mean, 10 years ago, you go to Saudi Arabia, and I mean, diversification. They talked to you about petrochem. And today, like, the economy is suddenly truly becoming diverse. It's healthcare and it's tourism. 10 years ago, you barely had women in the workplace. And today, like, it's an astonishing
in the short and the long term
every part of society.
To ensure that the sovereignty and longevity of Ukraine
AI is kind of hitting your economy almost from scratch as a diversified,
I was the Minister of National Defense at the time of the further illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine.
How are you deploying AI with people who are looking
from that perspective
at the world today?
The incursion into the Donbass and the fall of Ukrainian soldiers unjustifiably. How can we now? The question is, how can we, in the coalition of the willing, in the sense of NATO allies, continue the work that we need to do, which is support Ukraine, ensure those security guarantees are in place, and ensure that Ukraine has the future that its people deserve.
Thank you. I'm going to press you gently.
And started building the policy,
it's
the
very
regulation,
admirable, and I understand Canada's position, but in the end, isn't it true that this decision to end this war will not be made in Ottawa, it won't be made in Brussels, it will be made by the President of the United States? How and effectively when this war
we talked about diffusion
well, with
and
great
access
respect,
to compute,
if one really adheres to the principle of territorial integrity and state sovereignty, those very principles upon which the international legal order is based,
open access to data
then
was a pillar
one must admit that unless
COVID,
Ukraine is at the table,
and 19,
that the
ministry-level
would not be just.
I think that is an excellent point, and I think that is what we are facing right now, is perhaps
guidelines with flexibility,
a lack of respect for those exact principles that you're discussing. Senator, I'd like to turn to you. I notice you're wearing a pin. Could you tell us about the pin that you're wearing?
Well, as importantly, I'm wearing colors of Ukraine.
That's true.
And that's intentional. It wasn't accidental. I brought this from the United States for this purpose. I was in Denmark before I arrived here for 2 days.
Co-invested by the PIF,
and I guess
you're on Greenland. I'm sorry, you didn't go to New
not yet. But to really indicate that
we think
I and a number of other members have made it very clear that the way that we're going about projecting power in the Arctic is costly, divisive, and unnecessary. We'll have a different panel discussion about that. But with respect to Ukraine, I completely agree with the Minister. I've said from the beginning that there can be no resolution in Ukraine without Ukraine at the table, and actually without Ukraine's criteria for their freedom, for their territorial integrity. Those are all decisions that have to be made by the President, his advisors, and the Ukrainian people. The United States may be able to play a facilitating role, but I think that other NATO members and other European members should also have a say in that, because let's face it, we're talking about European security. We're talking about the security of a country that has a 1,340-mile or 40-kilometer border now. Thank you, Vladimir Putin, for letting us add Sweden and Finland to the mix. Look, Vladimir Putin is a murderer. He's a liar on his best day. And what we're seeing in Ukraine are his worst days. I was in Bucha, I was in Kyiv and Bucha last year after the Munich Security Conference. You can't trust him. We have to have, beyond Ukraine and the United States, we also have to have eyes on it from NATO allies, particularly those in the area, to make sure that we have a lasting and fair peace. But I think we have to look at everything that Vladimir Putin says and run it through a truth filter because he simply can't be trusted. So this agreement has to be very specific, and there have to be consequences for violating it.
Can I ask you very directly, do you think that all the noise around Greenland, the threats of tariffs, I know we're going to talk about it in other settings, but do you believe that all of this talk about Greenland is to distract from the fact that there was hopefully going to be a deal announced this week and now there isn't?
No, I can never get in the minds of people advising the president, but it certainly hasn't distracted Congress. I think you'll see an appropriations measure in place that will demonstrate financial support for Ukraine that will move through the Senate and the Congress in the coming weeks. And, the United States, as president, forces us all to be able to walk and chew gum. We can't just be focused on one issue. And I think in this case, we have to continue to focus on the real threat. There's no threat in Greenland, which is why, I think it's something that we need to de-escalate, something that we need to advise the president on a peaceful, more unifying path to achieving his goals, which we can talk about separately. But here the focus is on Ukraine. I think the American people still continue to support Ukraine, and this is an election year. Those who veer too far away may have electoral consequences to deal with, frankly.
And that's what I love about the fact that you're on that panel, because you're not running for election this year.
Yeah, but as I told the minister, if you check my record in the first administration, I was equally outspoken. Here's the point. This is where it's very important.
They're on the right track.
I support the majority of President Trump's policies. I'll give you a good example in Greenland. I support the what?
So as we
being
move into
able
the
to
last
project power in the Arctic. My goodness, anyone in NATO should understand that as a priority. We have Russia and China
the governance environment.
Actually in military exercises in the Arctic for the first time.
Which is,
large-scale military
international
exercises.
governance.
So clearly,
trying to figure out how you're going to build this
and Greenland makes a lot of geographic
in this
sense.
environment,
But you're talking about a territory that has offered for $1 one of their military bases. At the height of our relationship with Greenland and Denmark, we had 17 military operations there. We have one today. So for anyone to suggest that in order for us to be present in Greenland and project power, that it requires some financial transaction, which incidentally, as a fiscal conservative, would be more costly than we need to achieve the president's aim. And I think over time, hopefully we'll get the president to recognize that and have the policy that's commensurate with that.
Well, the first thing I would say is look back
I suppose the argument is that in a world where China, with Russia as a somewhat client state,
than it is, frankly, to invest in data centers.
If the United States does not own that territory, that they could get very severe and serious pushback from a Europe that is wavering between the United States and a very, very powerful China. Anyway, that's
yeah, but again, if I can just briefly,
part of
as well.
You can do that through universities. That's where you start to get people who can then build the local applications.
Justifiable frustration with some of our brothers and sisters in NATO who came far short of their investment in our mutual defense over the last 20 years.
Or regulation.
I've been the Republican leader of the Senate NATO Observer Group for 20 years.
You would say this will make me materially more interested in investing.
$2 trillion with a T
governance
has not been spent to achieve the minimum that our colleagues should have in NATO. Can you imagine what deterrent effect there would have been if every member of NATO had actually invested the $2 trillion over 20 years? What would that have done for modernization? What would that have done for the industrial base?
It's important for
so I think a part of the president's frustration, and no one can doubt that everyone paying up to the minimum now and now achieving 5% limits, anyone credit anyone other than Donald Trump's not been following current events. Every past president in this century attempted to do it, and they didn't. So I think he's frustrated by that. But that frustration should not transcend into the current policy posture with respect to Greenland. I think we have to de-escalate it, but I hope that this is an important lesson learned by those of us who care about NATO and believe it's the most consequential and important treaty in the history of man. Let's make sure that we don't drift again, or we put ourselves in the same sort of vulnerable position that we find ourselves today.
Could I just emphasize the importance of focusing on Ukraine, which is what this panel is about?
I want to say, I know that you, the way you think about regulation,
heard from someone from the president's office
in India, are not just thinking about the laws that you're creating, but also how you use the technology to actually create
about the importance of security guarantees and the importance of Ukraine deciding its own sovereign future. And I think
like AI, it's very important to have a techno-legal approach to regulation.
To ensure that we are supporting Ukraine
and believe that
as it enters,
you have to create
yet another year. We're almost 4 years on since the further illegal invasion.
For example, bias as
and we need to seek a resolution, and we need to ensure that Ukraine's at the table in that process. So the real question, if this is truly a panel about Ukraine, the real question is how we can support
mitigate bias,
this process.
Which help in
I agree with
detecting
you.
deepfakes,
We don't
which
hold
make
the
sure that
levers
unlearning can be
to
done
ensure
properly
that a
before you
ceasefire
deploy
occurs ourselves. But
model
that doesn't mean that
so
we
kind of
withdraw.
Thank you. So I'm going
and do
to try
nothing.
to take one question to begin.
In fact,
please
what it means
recognize
is
yourself.
we search
if you can be quick, I'll try to get to two. We'll see where we get.
So I've been asked to stand up,
by
so
which we can assist
I'm Pranjal Sharma. I'm a columnist
that the rule of law
from India, and I focus on the intersection
and the territorial integrity, meaning the geographical boundaries of Ukraine.
We've seen weaponization of digital platforms and AI.
I agree completely.
We saw a case in India where a company's digital footprint was switched off within seconds. We saw two justices of the International Court of Justice face the same. So my question to all of you is, how critical is this threat of weaponization of digital platforms, including AI, and is that therefore driving this piece of tech and AI sovereignty beyond just the data sets and controlling data?
Well, you know, every technology is both a tool and a weapon. There's a book with that title. I think unfortunately, just as there's almost an infinite number of ways to turn AI into a tool, it can also be turned into a weapon. I would highlight two issues that I think are really paramount today. One is the use of AI to increase cyber threats. And that just is a classic case of where you need a united response from both the tech sector and governments working together. So in part, we're using AI as a cyber shield, if you will. But then the other issue, and the one you're really pointing to, is in a world where people are so dependent on technology, when governments, when countries are run on technology, is there a risk that technology gets turned off? And I think we have to continue to advance the kind of international dialogue so we have agreements between countries that will take that off the table, if you will, that will not make that part of a trade debate. If people want to apply tariffs, well, you're increasing the prices, but the goods are still available. And I think we need the kinds of steps as we've been pursuing, say, with a country like India, for example, to provide assurance of supply. And I think this also really naturally involves more local control, local laws, local suppliers, local partnerships, all of these things have become part of a complex web. They're just indispensable for how this technology is used in the future.
Urgency of lack of international engagement on that last one right now, scale of 1 to 10.
Glass is half full, it's half empty, it's a 5, Ian. There's so much more that could be done.
Ці непорозуміння, які є між країнами, які весь цей час нам допомагали, акумулюємо зусилля, мобілізуємо
the New Delhi Hub. I'm a 22-year-old entrepreneur. My question is for Mr. Smith as well. And what would be the correct analogy for the example you used about railroads and power plants in context of AI? And do you think the solution to fix that is to put universities and centers at the forefront rather than companies doing the job?
Follow-on question, which is that
the thing that I would highlight,
what is it? Do you think that
I would suggest in the
Vladimir Putin will be
of technology driving
with some territorial concessions,
to railroads,
a
to
cessation of
to the hostilities, to
and a
highways
promise
for
that
cars,
Ukraine in the foreseeable future will not join NATO? Or do you think that will be a holding position for Russia to embolden Vladimir Putin and his administration to restart the hostilities at a future date, not too far in the future?
That is helping to spread infrastructure around the world. But there are key shortages we need to address. probably the most important in most countries is for people. What Kristalina was saying. India actually is providing much of the IQ that is creating IP for the world. But if you look at Africa, for every one data scientist, there's 14 data scientists in Europe. That is a shortage that governments and universities can help meet. I would also say then we need more capital to be deployed where the market is not building these data centers. Development banks, development assistance can play a role, but governments can help stimulate demand. When the public sector adopts AI, when countries consolidate demand by putting together, say, regional agreements to enable a data center to serve 6 countries and not one, that will stimulate more investment. We need to get the investment moving. And I think governments are best served when they survey the market, look for the market failures, and fill in the gaps.
Last quick question, young woman in the front.
Далі пішов Донбас, там тематика НАТО використовувалась трошки поверхнево. І далі але використовувалась. І далі наступив вже етап широкомасштабного вторгнення 22-го року.
Yes, education is very important, but the people are leaving universities and they need the entry-level jobs. I don't know if any of you have some thoughts on this question of, yes, we get education, but then how can the youth actually get these entry-level jobs and what solutions can we actually bring for this?
Логіку Російської Федерації, тобто приєднання України, що за логікою Російської Федерації несе ідеологічну, навіть можна сказати, і екзистенційну загрозу для існування Російської Федерації. Тому чи буде Росія наполягати на тому, щоб Україна не стала членом НАТО, точно буде наполягати. Що з цього вийде? Давайте подивимося. Будь-який перемовний процес, він взагалі-то любить тишу, але частково ви все одно будете всі це бачити.
Mr. Veltonen, I want to ask your analysis on Vladimir Putin. I know you're going to tell me who knows, and you can't understand the Russian perspective, but what do you think his ultimate goal is? Is it genuinely the reconstitution of the great Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire? Do you think that if he achieves at least some of his aims in Ukraine, that the Baltics could be threatened? Next.
Well, I guess he has been quite outspoken about his goals. He published his writing, was it back in 21? And that certainly not only was about re-establishing the Soviet Empire, but certainly also limiting also the posture of NATO and all this. But I have to say, because Russians typically use this narrative of NATO being a threat to them, which obviously is completely bollocks. If you
technical term,
if you now think about when Finland and Sweden joined NATO,
and actually we strongly advocate for this issue of skills.
There hasn't been less troops behind the Finnish border to Russia in the past 3 years than basically for decades. If NATO was such a massive threat,
I'm glad we ended with that. It's a good note.
Why have the troops in Ukraine? Why not bring them back to the border? So, of course, that is simply a narrative that Russia has been pushing to justify this and that they operate, which is fully against the UN Charter. And when it comes to the previous discussion, I actually do agree both with Senator Tillis and Minister Anand in this. Well, yes, we need a just peace for Ukraine, but at the same time, we need to be fortifying NATO. And that is because I'm not seeing the threat of Russia going away with any peace deal, especially if it's not a good peace deal. The Russian threat probably will be there for, I don't know, for the foreseeable future, and it will be affecting the entire transatlantic alliance. We do see the Russian threat, certainly from the Arctic. They are active in Africa, and of course they are active where, they have the possibility and the interest to do so. But together, if we invest decisively into our defense and deterrence, then
certainly there's nothing that can keep us from winning. And also, finally, on the question whether Russia was winning on Ukraine, certainly no. I mean, if you were winning, you would be abducting children or having people freezing their apartments when it's -15 outside. They're certainly not winning, and I think Ukrainians have all the right not just to assume that they will have the freedom that they have been fighting for, but that will come. I'm more than certain about it.
I've been having some interesting discussions here in Davos last couple of days, and one of the arguments I've heard is that NATO is done, NATO is over, and that we are seeing the just dissolution of this, as you say, very important treaty that has lasted since, for a long time, and that we're seeing the birth of something new. Maybe call it a board of peace, call it what you like. But how much do you think that argument rings true to any of you on the panel? So.
Well, Canada's a founding member of NATO, and maybe I'll just start, and I'm sure others have valuable things to say. I will admit there is no doubt that NATO is facing challenges now as it seeks to ensure that there's unity in NATO, as well as the concept of collective defense and deterrence is actually effective in practice. That doesn't mean that NATO dissolves. It means that NATO rises to the challenge to meet the moment. And I have been continuously pressing the point that NATO, as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, needs to not only have a focus on the eastern flank of Europe, but also on the northern and western flanks, because as we all agree, the threat from Russia in the Arctic and beyond is undeniable. And if NATO is going to meet this moment, it needs also to develop the strategy to do so. And that's what my conversations with the Nordic Five and Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, have been about. What is the strategy to meet the moment? NATO needs that strategy.
Feel free to weigh in on this topic of NATO defunct or not. I'm going to throw another question in there, and I'm going to address it to you, Mr. Budanov. How important, from your perspective, is the role of China? Because if you listen to the US administration, but if you also look at the facts, I've talked to the heads of several Western intelligence agencies who say that if China was not supporting Russia today with technological, military, logistical support, Russia would not have been able to continue to fight up until this point. So how important, from your perspective, and others can weigh in, is the role of China in this conflict?
Дякую вам за це питання. Питання ваше, знаєте, воно більше філософське, насправді. Ну, як зараз, в 26-му році, відповісти на питання, так, а як би все відбувалося, якщо б Китаю там не було? Чи якби його роль була абсолютно інакша? Я думаю, ви з цим твердженням погодитесь. Значить, тепер стосовно, скажімо так, реальної ролі Китаю у всьому цьому процесі. Я буду приводити просто, мабуть, перелік прикладів, і кожен нехай робить з цього свій висновок. Якщо пригадати перший період широкомасштабного вторгнення після 22-го року, у світовій пресі дуже багато, в період весни, літа 22-го року, було статей, різних там відеозаписів, колонок авторських про те, як з Китаю в Росію, інколи навіть військовими бортами доправляли тисячами пральні машинки, різні там комп'ютери і так далі, так далі, так далі. Це все відбувалося, вибачте, через те, що різко з'явилась критична необхідність у різного роду контролерах, мікросхемах і так далі, які, до речі, напряму в перші дні війни Китай не продавав. Це теж просто є факт. Далі Китай зрозумів, як всім цим користуватись, а Росія, оскільки як агресор виявилася під ще більшими обмеженнями, ніж була, почала шукати шляхи виходу з цієї ситуації. Цілком очевидно, що вона через бізнес-канали при, скажімо так, мовчазній згоді зверху знайшла надійного партнера для того, щоб мати надійні канали постачання. Перш за все електроніки, компонентів електроніки. Потім пішли верстати, потім пішли різні матеріали, з яких робляться ті чи інші елементи озброєнь і так далі, і так далі. Тобто ця кооперація посилювалася. Росія за це платила величезні